On this last day of Christmas, we once again are offered a reading from the prophet Isaiah, this one traditionally associated with Epiphany. The words in this passage are among the most hopeful in all of Scripture. Probably written after the Jews have returned from exile in Babylon, they point to a bright new future. This is Isaiah 60, verses 1 through 6, the ingathering of the dispersed. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But the Lord will arise upon you, and his glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together, they come to you. Your sons shall come from far away, and your daughters shall be carried on their nurses' arms. Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice, because the abundance of the sea shall be brought to you. The wealth of the nations shall come to you. A multitude of camels shall cover you. The young camels of Midian and Ephah, and all those from Sheba shall come. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of the Lord.
That reading from Isaiah that's always assigned to Epiphany and often is used on this Sunday before Epiphany has that wonderful line, "A multitude of camels shall cover you." I've been preaching on Epiphany Sundays for 40 plus years now. I've yet to preach a sermon on that phrase, but one of these years, a sermon titled "A multitude of camels shall cover you" is in the works. I love it. It's quite the image. I don't even want to think what chompers would do with it. Okay. Our gospel reading today comes from the Gospel of Matthew and is the lesson always assigned to Epiphany. It is the story of the Magi. I want to take a moment to remind you that the three kings we talk about is an inaccurate sort of description of these gentlemen. They were not kings at all. They may have been advisors in the royal court. In fact, more than likely that would have been their role. They were magi. M-A-G-I, magi, wise men, magicians, astrologers. That was their role. Their role was to watch the heavens, to watch the stars, to inform kings and others of what fate held for them. And there was a strong belief in that day among most of the ancient peoples of that part of the world that when a special person was born, a new star appeared. Hence, the importance of the star in this story of the Magi. The story doesn't speak of three Magi or three wise men. It doesn't tell us how many there were, even though some Bibles will have as the editorial head for this section the story of the three wise men. It doesn't say how many there were. It does say they bring three gifts, and that's come down to us as three wise men, but we don't know how many there were. Hear these words then. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word, that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard, and the spaces in between, help us to remember what we have learned. Amen. Several years ago, I received a delightful collection of essays, stories, poems, and cartoons titled "Christmas at the New Yorker." Many of the items in the collection reflect that classic magazine's often acerbic wit. One of the cartoons, drawn by Jack Ziegler, depicts a street corner in Manhattan, complete with a trash barrel. In the barrel is the tip of a humongous upside-down Christmas tree, its trunk pointing straight skyward. The caption reads, "January 3rd at Rockefeller Center." What is it that they say? Nothing is quite as over as Christmas when it's over. And how true that is for many, many people. Even though technically Christmas lasts until Epiphany, there are those like the Rockefeller Center cleanup crew who can't wait to be done with it. Folks who just want to get back to their routine lives. And as far as Charles Dickens' suggestion that Christmas ought to last all through the year, they can only say, "Bah, humbug." But for others, Christmas proves a very welcome respite, a respite from the problems of everyday life. I'm an avid NPR listener. I almost always catch part of Morning Edition. I try to listen to parts of All Things Considered. I listen on my 20-minute ride to and from work every day. But this year, once the Christmas music started streaming, I decided to take a pass on the news and just revel in Jingle Bells, and it came upon the Midnight Clear and the Carol of the Bells and other assorted carols and songs of the season. And it was a respite. I'm not among those who wish Christmas would last all year long. I'd be so exhausted I'd be in my grave if it did. But I do understand that temptation. While I didn't listen to the news during my daily commute, I couldn't help but hear it, follow it, at other times even pursue it. And this year it seemed like one of the most contentious Christmas seasons of my entire life. Daily updates about the impeachment process, coupled with angry tweets and sound bites from every corner and every side of the argument. Bombings resuming in Iraq, attacks against Jews in Jersey City and Muncie, New York, even a gunfight in a church in Texas. All in all, it was a somewhat depressing December, especially when all that was contrasted to the bright lights and songs of the season. All that, of course, didn't slow down Christmas shopping, though more and more of that happens online these days. It was up by 18% this year, online shopping. But despite the good economy, many folks are still being shocked by the bills that have begun to show up in their mailboxes and inboxes. Another cartoon from the New Yorker, this one from Mike Toohey. Santa is standing at the end of a very long table where elves are busy making toys. One of the little guys puts up his hand and he asks, "Just how do you propose to pay for this giveaway?" Sounds like a presidential debate question. Maybe then, this year at least, we are just as well off to be done with Christmas. After all, it only served to distract us from the real work at hand of addressing climate change, bringing home the troops from Afghanistan, addressing our concerns about Iran and North Korea, finding solutions to gun violence, rising above the partisanship, the rampant partisanship. Christmas 2019, good riddance. It's time for a change. But hold on a moment. If all we got out of Christmas were credit card bills and a little bit of respite from everyday problems, then we missed the whole point of the holy season. Maybe we can learn something. Rather than throwing Bethlehem's baby out with the bathwater of the day, let's see what Christmas can teach us. And maybe this story of the Magi can help us to sort it all out. Usually, we only think of the Magi at this time of year. They show up in special songs like We Three Kings and add a bit of spice, so to speak, to Christmas pageants. But for all intents and purposes, we've left those poor Magi stuck in Bethlehem. But as the story is told by Matthew, they don't stay in Bethlehem. They leave the Holy Family and head back home to Persia, much as you and I get back to the tasks of daily life in this first part of January. They came to Bethlehem via Jerusalem, and that's how their GPS wants them to go back, the same way that they came. It's the cheapest route, lots of gas stations along the way. But things are bad in the capital city, and they are only going to get worse. So they return, having been warned in a dream, by a different way. Yes, the Magi go back home, but their Bethlehem encounter has changed their perspective. It has changed their outlook. It may have been tempting for the Magi to stay in Bethlehem, where they had known the joy of being in the presence of the promised Messiah, this newborn king. But that was not to be. That was no more possible than you and I living in Christmas 24/7. But God didn't want them to simply be done with it. Indeed, God expected them to take their new understandings back with them. God expected them to go home not just a different way, not just by a different route, but different themselves. As scholar Stanley Auerbach writes, God did not mean for them to stay in Israel. Rather, they are charged to return home, becoming an outpost, a witness to the joy they have experienced. So what can you bring back home after your annual sojourn in Bethlehem? What have you experienced? What have you learned this Christmas season? How has your perspective been changed? Maybe you volunteered at or attended our Christmas Eve beach service, and there were reminded how grateful you are that the remains of red tide are finally gone. Maybe you rediscovered that the importance of preserving our environment comes to all of us. Maybe you realized afresh that we really are all in it together, that what you do not only impacts you, but those around you and even the earth itself. Maybe if things have been tight for your own family, and though the stock market is going nuts, it was a tight Christmas for many people. Maybe if you were one of those families and had to cut back on your usual Christmas budget, maybe you were reminded that it's not really about the gifts, but rather the love that we have for one another. Maybe if you've had a family member caught up in the uncertainty of job loss, as I have had, you've recognized just how hard it can be for those who are perpetually poor, those who are always underemployed. Maybe if you've been grieving this Christmas, as have so many of our members, maybe you've realized anew how very important it is to show your love to those around you every single time you have an opportunity. Every time to say, I love you. Maybe if you or a loved one has struggled with health issues this season, you've been reminded what a truly amazing gift you have been given in your body, and have rededicated yourself to treating it with care and respect. Maybe if you've felt estranged from God or distant from the church, you have seen once more how important your spirit is to your sense of well-being. Only you know what you've experienced this year as you've sung the carols and knelt by the manger. But whatever the experience, whatever the lessons, their usefulness isn't limited to the 12 days of Christmas. Indeed, we are called by God to allow those lessons to change us, to alter our perspective. We are called to return from Bethlehem by a different way. We're invited to come home from Christmas as different people, newly empowered and committed to sharing the good news that Christ is born not in the lap of luxury, but rather right in the middle of the challenges of life. That's where Christ is born, right in the middle of life. So go ahead, take down the decorations, finish up the last of those Christmas cookies, unless you've made a certain kind of New Year's resolution. Update the mailing lists for your cards. Put away the leftover wrapping paper. That's good ecology. Recycle the tree. For it is indeed time to come home from Christmas. But it is also time to live the lessons this holy season has taught us. It is time to bear witness to the good news that as wonderful as things like gifts and cards and trees are, and they are wonderful, they're truly wonderful, some things are truly more important and ultimately even more wonderful. Things like health and meaningful work and family relationships and helping others get along. Things like being at peace with God. We can remember Christmas 2019 as the most contentious in recent memory, or we can remember it as the Christmas that reminded us again how to live lives of meaning and purpose. On this 12th day of Christmas, the choice is yours. The choice is mine. The choice is ours. How will you remember this Christmas? And more importantly, how will you live out its lessons?